In the valley of Liora, where morning fog curled like silk through the orchard trees, a child was born under a sky braided with light. They named her Liora, and the midwife whispered that the newborn's hair shone like liquid colour, not a single pigment but every hue woven together. At first, the family thought it a trick of dawn, a trick of candlelight. By the time Liora was a week old, the hair had lengthened in impossible waves, catching the sun and throwing it back as a ribboned band of rainbow. It shimmered when she moved. It hummed softly when wind passed through it. People from the village came to press their palms to the baby's tiny feet and marvel. Old Sepp the miller muttered about omens. Aunt Myra crossed herself and blessed the crib. Liora grew with the hair. By the time she could walk, she had hair down to her knees. By 5 it flowed to her ankles. The colours did not fade when washed. They only grew more vibrant after storms. Those who touched the strands felt warmth, like sunlight on skin, and sometimes a memory, a scent from childhood, a laugh from years ago, would flutter through their chest and leave them smiling. The hair did not belong only to Liora. It seemed to belong to the valley itself, as if the land had decided to crown one of its children in wild radiance. Yet with beauty there travelled a whisper of danger, for in the world beyond Liora, there were eyes that watched for what made other people rare. As Liora grew taller and more curious, the palace tutors arrived. Her father, Duke Rowan, who had married into Liora's modest line, worried but could not hide a fierce pride. He hired wise women, seamstresses, and a stoic swordmaster to ensure she learned the world's ways. Liora learned to read with maps of constellations curling above her bed, and to weave stories into songs while her hair brushed the floor. She loved geometry, the way light passed through crystal, and the quiet jeopardy of older trees. The wise woman Licer, who smelled of lavender and ink, taught Liora that magic asks for friendship and consent, that extraordinary things could be gifts or burdens, and wisdom lay in choosing how to use them. Your hair listens, Licer told her once, threading a simple ribbon into a violet lock. It is part of you and part of the valley. If you pull what it knows without care, you might pull what you cannot put back. At market, strangers came with polite smiles and 2 slick questions. They offered trinkets, silver, promises of distant schools and gilded courts. Liora's mother, Lady Anna, taught her the shape of caution, to smile and refuse, to close the doors when needed. Even so, rumour travelled faster than gates. A cartographer from the southern kingdom sketched a map with a tiny crown and wrote, in a language of ink and hunger, Liora, riches in hair. The Duke posted guards and forbade travel beyond the valley borders, but Liora's spirit fluttered at the thought of a road stretching beyond the orchard. Every 5 years, Liora celebrated the festival of ribbon light, honouring the harvest and the colours that made their valley renowned. Bunting hung between apple trees, lanterns bobbed like low stars, and musicians tuned strings to a gentle, waking key. This year, Liora was old enough to ride through the town in the spring cart, her hair braided into a cascade of loops and bells that chimed like tiny glass. Children ran ahead, leaving trails of dandelion seeds that glittered when caught in the rainbow sheen. Liora sat high on the cart and felt the village's affection like a warm cloak. People pressed flowers into the braid, and by evening the hair smelled of roses and fresh bread. During the ceremonial lighting, the hair pulsed with a soft glow. The lanterns seemed to reflect not light back at them but back into themselves, as if the colours taught the darkness how to be bright. Elders told stories of old guardians, of colour keepers who mended the sky's tattered ribbons. Liora listened with a beating chest. That night, as fireworks stitched transient rainbows above the river, her hair brushed the water and made ripples that held tiny, perfect stars. But amid the laughter, a figure lingered near the tree line, a traveller wrapped in a cloak the colour of ash, who watched with a hunger that careful faces could not hide. He left at dawn, leaving a folded scrap of parchment in the dust. The parchment carried a symbol Liora's wise woman recognised from ancient books, the sigil of withering, a mark that named a dark craft that devoured colour and left only grey. The first time Liora noticed the thinning, she was 15 and learning how to press flowers into manuscripts. A curl, once buoyant with light like a spun prism, drooped and dulled. It didn't fall, not yet, but when she braided the lock, a strand came out between her fingers like a sigh. Worry prickled along her spine. Liora examined the strand, touching it with reverence and concern. "This is not natural," as she said softly. Something reached for it. That night Liora dreamed she was walking through a forest where the leaves had lost their green and sat like papers on the ground. A shadow moved between trunks, hollow as a sigh. It reached up with a hand like a crow's beak and plucked a ribbon of sky. Liora woke with her heart hammering and the scent of smoke in the air. When she looked in the mirror, small patches of her hair seemed paler, as if someone had taken a brush and scrubbed at paint. The Duke convened a council. Hunters scoured the borders. Liora and Lady Anna sewed charms into her garments and taught Liora simple words to hum when the hair felt thin. "You must be careful who you let braid you," Liora warned. "There are people who will ask, and ask again, until your kindness is worn thin." Liora tried to keep the fear wrapped inside like a private knot, but when she went to the orchard the trees seemed to whisper sorrow. Something else roamed beyond the valley, and it had tasted colour. A messenger arrived with news from the far capital. A scholar named Marcellus requested an audience. He arrived with a satchel of rare books and a face that smiled like a locked door. He spoke in smooth sentences about art and preservation, about the science of pigments and the need to study Liora's hair to protect it for generations. The Duke listened politely, but his eyes flicked to Liora and the way strangers always studied her as if she might be a harvest. Liora met Marcellus under a willow. He talked of galleries where colours were indexed and stored, of salons where light was measured. His voice was velvet, his gestures elegant. He showed her an instrument, a curious lens that made colours bloom into diagrams, and promised her a library that would never forget her. "Imagine your hair saved," he said. "Imagine if no thief could find it again because scholars would know how to guard it." Liora wanted to believe. The idea of knowledge that could protect the valley tugged at the part of her that loved geometry and maps. But when Marcellus reached out and lightly brushed a strand of her hair, she recoiled. The touch was cool, like a winter apple, and the strand quivered with a tiny, dimming echo. She remembered Liora's words about consent. "No," she whispered, and Marcellus's smile hardened for a brief second before he recovered. He left with honeyed words and a promise to return with instruments. The valley watched him go, and the shadow that had once hovered in the tree line seemed to follow in his wake. The night of the silver moon was the night the colours fled. Liora had slept fitfully while the Duke drank, and the guards whispered of traitors and traitors. At midnight she woke to a cold that moved through fabric itself, and a silence so full it pressed on her ears. She padded to the window and saw a mist crawling over the fields like a slow, greedy hand. Outside, figures moved with a smoothness that made the air ache, cloaked forms that bent low to the ground as if listening for something. She ran to her mirror and found it dim, the reflection of the room lacking the usual warmth. Then she felt it, a tug at the base of her skull, as if someone had pulled gently on the root of a violin string. The hair along her shoulders felt thin and stiff. She grabbed the nearest candle and held it to her braid. The colours did not flare back. Instead they retreated, like timid fish slithering away from a net. Liora heard the muffled sound of glass shattering downstairs, a cry, then the Duke's roar. Guards ran, and a low keening rose through the castle as if the building itself mourned. By dawn, large stretches of Liora's hair were grey as older stone. The bells of Liora told a heavy knell. In the market, stallholders wept as bright goods dulled. Liora found the gate a small, twisted blade etched with the sigil of withering. The valley had been visited by the thing they feared most, a guild that harvested color to power their own palaces of frost and stone. Liora looked at what remained of her hair and felt a grief that was both personal and communal. This was not just loss, it was theft from the valley's heart. The Duke's pride could not hold up the valley's future. He sent Liora, disguised in a cloak dyed to mute her remaining colors, with a small band of loyalists to seek the Grey Court, a place Marcellus had mentioned in passing, a court where the guild kept their archives and made deals under chandeliers that swallowed light. Liora felt fear and anger braided together in her chest. She vowed she would not be studied like a specimen nor let the valley's beauty be gobbled by the cold. The road to the Grey Court unfurled through highlands that had lost their luster. Where streams had once glittered with mica, slabs of dull stone lay like bruises. Along the way their party met other victims, a painter whose canvases had been leached of colour, a seamstress with thread ashen as dust. They traded stories and small comforts, a jar of elderberry jam, a song about a brave ship. Liora's remaining hair thinned into a cape she kept wrapped close. At the edge of the Grey Court, the gates rose like teeth. Soldiers in muted armour inspected them and let them pass. Inside, opulence was tinged with cruelty, silver filigree that did not reflect, crystal chandeliers that made the room colder. There, in a hallway lined with preserved pigments, Liora saw Marcellus speak with a man whose beard seemed to drink light. He introduced the man as Master Var, a collector of rare things and the guild's leader. When Liora stepped forward, everyone's faces lifted with the same measuring curiosity. She felt like a specimen again, smaller, but also strangely resolute. Master Var was all clever words and cold smiles. He praised her patience, the way her voice still held laughter despite loss. He offered a bargain. He could restore what was taken if Liora agreed to lend a thread of her hair each month to the guild's archive, where its essence would be bottled and used to colour important manuscripts and royal robes. The terms felt like a gilded cage. "You would become our steward," Ivar said. "Your gift would teach us. We would protect Liora from future thefts because only we would understand your hair." Liora thought of the orchard and the way the children once danced under the ribbon light. She imagined her hair locked away, measured and displayed, its wildness turned to museum pieces. She remembered Lyser's lesson about consent. "No," Ishi said, but the word trembled. Behind Var's courtesy was the shadow of coercion. Behind Marcellus's polished promise lay a ledger of Favis owed. As they debated, a trick played out in the library. Marcellus slipped a cordial to one of the guards. Liora felt dizzy, a pale fog eating the edges of her vision. When she came to, the archive doors had swung open and a chest lay at her feet filled with shards of colour, threads, powdered pigments, little flasks like bottled suns. Her heart soared. But the chest was a trap. Var's men surged forward. Marcellus's smile sharpened to a blade. They meant to take her hair by force, to cage and study and never give it back. Liora realized the bargain had been bait. She would have to choose a different kind of courage. When the guards lunged, Liora acted with a kind of clarity that surprised her. She wrapped her remaining hair around her wrist not as adornment but as rope, and she pulled the strands through her fingers with a fierce, new intent. She had learned small hymns from Lyser, songs that asked for permission rather than command. Standing face to face with Var, she sang, not a plea but an invitation. "Colour, return to the land, listen to the valley's voice." The sound rose like wind in the orchard, and for the first time the hair responded to her will rather than to other people's hands. The hair slid free from those who tried to seize it, threading itself through locks and around wrists until it looped like a net. It did not fall away, it chose. The threads leapt like rivers and burst against the archive's walls, where pigments slumbered in boxes. Colour leapt into the air, a vivid, living shower, and the room that had been so cold drank it like someone finally taking a long-awaited breath. The pigments awoke, not as objects to be owned, but as kin to the valley's old light. Guards and collectors fell back, blinking and disoriented, because what they had wanted to possess had instead taught them a lesson in belonging. Master Var, whose beard had once swallowed light, felt his own shadow peel away. He had been feeding on stolen shades to feed the grey that sustained him. As the colours reknit themselves through Ilara's song, the grey quartz gilded chill weakened. Marcellus scrambled, desperate to collect what he could, but every jar he touched dissolved into a larf of colour and slipped through his fingers like water. Ilara returned to Liora not as a trophy, but as a steward who had learned the price of trust. The valley greeted her like a familiar melody, fruit heavier on the boughs, streams that tingled with restored light. People gathered at the orchard's edge, eyes wet with gratitude and a little awe. Her hair now reached like a curtain of living colour, threaded with tiny charms and ribbons that told the story of what had happened. A stitch for courage, a knot for sorrow, a bead for every person who had helped. She refused to let the threads be locked away by strangers. Instead, she taught her people how to tend to colour, how to harvest dyes without greed, how to mend a fabric's soul when it had frayed. Lyser started a school with students who learned not to bottle beauty but to share it responsibly. The former collectors were exiled or reformed. Some became apprentices learning to bake pigments back into life. Master Var vanished into rumour, perhaps to find a shadowed mountain where grey could no longer hold him. Years later, travellers came to Liora and found not a princess displayed but a valley thriving. Children braided one another's hair with playful confidence, and the river shone like a long, honest mirror. Ilara walked through the orchards and sometimes sang to the trees, whose leaves answered with green so fresh it seemed new each day. When asked about her hair, she would laugh and say that it was only one thread of what the valley could become when people chose care over possession. And on nights when the moon was full and the sky braided itself with faint auroras, Ilara would climb the orchard hill and let her hair spill down to the earth. The colours would ripple and drift into the soil like seeds, and in the morning, wherever a strand had brushed, new wildflowers would bloom with colours that had names the painters did not yet know. The valley never forgot that beauty, like a good story, is meant to be shared, and that the truest magic is the kind that returns.